Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today we're going to have a great discussion today because we're going to talk about something that I probably both personally and professionally we're trying to accomplish, and that is less friction, and how that extends onto the customer, because we have Bill Price on the show today. Bill Price grew up in Towson, outside of Baltimore, and he's a 12th generation Marylander whose ancestor, Thomas Price, arrived from Wales on one of the 2 founding ships in 1634. He played a lot of sports, including soccer, as his father did in high school and college, and into his 40s. Baseball, gymnastics, and track were also things that he had great focus on. And you know what? He is also a great and fair, he says, quarter miler. Scouting, school choirs, and church activities also kept him busy. Bill's parents instilled in his younger sister and him a respect for American history with numerous field trips. Bill ventured out of Maryland to attend college at Dartmouth in New Hampshire, where he earned an NROTC scholarship, beginning a lifelong wanderlust that has taken him to 92 countries, his favorite being Cambodia, Japan, and San Marino. He deferred business school for a 5-year tour with the Navy as a surface warfare officer on a guided missile destroyer and an assistant professor of naval science at UC Berkeley's NROTC unit, where he taught American military history. After arriving in California, Bill never looked back. Bill's first job after graduating from Stanford Business School was with the global consulting firm McKinsey & Company in its San Francisco and Stockholm offices. He loved the combination of teaching and problem solving that McKinsey reinforced, extending his travel bug across Europe and Asia. Afterward, Bill decided to move as far from management consulting as possible and landed a job as a CFO for a startup IVR service bureau in San Francisco. He and his first wife welcomed 2 beautiful spirited daughters, and they traveled together to Kauai, Whistler, and the Atlanta Olympics and many other places. After MCI acquired that company, Bill built out MCI Call Center Services, which spanned 2,100 agents performing inbound care and over 100,000 network-based routing and automation ports, and a location and productivity consulting arm. Bill then pursued a VC deal for a proto-cloud services company he called eCare, but became Amazon's #1 worldwide VP of customer service in his new hometown of Seattle. Together with a passionate and dedicated team, Bill helped Amazon achieve the highest ever ACSI score and enhance its customer ecstasy and reduce the number of customer contacts, implementing his vision of the best service is no service. After almost 3 years, Bill left the Amazon pressure cooker to hang out his shingle to teach companies how to balance cost controls and customer experience, which continues to excite him. Bill has co-authored 3 books with David Jaffe, who is based in Melbourne, Australia, and his 4th book will be a memoir of his grandfather, who served in the U.S. Navy in World War I and World War II. Bill Price, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Ready. Looking forward to it, Jim. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Now, I've given my Legion a little bit, about you, but if you start to look and say, what are some of the top things that are important to you in regards to frictionless experience and frictionless service delivery, what kind of stands out to you?
Well, the first thing is just a relentless process improvement. This is not easy to do. We know more about friction than we know about being frictionless because we run across friction all the time. Interruptions, problems, mistakes, and so forth. Frictionless should actually be almost like you don't even notice that it's there. So the only way to get there is to be relentless, to be able to tear everything apart and really focus on what are the those roadblocks, so that those points of friction. So that's the main thing. The second thing I'd say is that it is a big job across the entire organization. It's not just customer service's job. It's not the customer service rep's job per se. They just have to fix the problem at the moment. The corporation's got to lean in and do all of it.
Well, you even talk about, removing friction for a
Mhm.
customer. You say it's a miracle, miracle cure. So
Yeah.
how is removing friction a miracle cure for customers?
Well, we like to talk, of course, about win-win situations. This is kind of like a win-win-win. It kind of has all sorts of benefits. The first win is that the customers don't have to interrupt their processes, what they're doing to contact companies for support. So it's a win for the customers. The customers just move on and get stuff done. They use the products, they use the services without interruption. The second win is for the company. It costs less money. It's less effort for them to be able to put in place some more staff, more assets and resources. And thirdly, it's actually much less friction for any customer-facing customer support employee, because they wind up dealing with issues that are easier, and the customers are happier to contact them for stuff that is actually positive. Things like, well, how can I buy more of your products, or tell me more about this new issue you've got, a new opportunity you have, rather than my bill is wrong, or my internet's down again, or you didn't deliver this product on time. So the customer service rep winds up talking about more positive things and can build what we always talk about, more empathy and more relationship.
Well, as we're talking, and you and I have talked before about this, there was a study that came out 20 plus years ago talking about service recovery and how vital that is to customer loyalty, and that we have to do a good job of service recovery. And so I start thinking about frictionless, and is it possible that we take it too far to where the organization becomes meaningless?
Well, I suppose theoretically that's possible, but the problem with service recovery as a concept is that if you don't service recover, if you don't recover that problem that came into the company that was caused because of friction and other problems, then it's almost the worst customer experience and the worst loyalty, higher turnover, higher churn. So it's a slippery slope. If you do a good job, customers feel happy at the moment. They'll give you a positive review, maybe a positive net promoter score or other type of response. But what we research and what we found out from these companies is the customer goes away and then kind of says, wait a minute, now, why did I have to do that in the first place? Why did I have to contact them? Sure, they fixed it. I'm glad they fixed it. Good on them. But why did I have to even contact them in the first place? And that's what we're hearing from these companies that we're able to interview and profile in the book.
Well, in the book, you talk about how more and more newer and innovative, organizations are getting this right. Mm-hmm. And so it led me to ask the question, well, is it a situation where, legacy, size of organization, years in operation, are those things kind of a death sentence?
They don't have to be. They can be. We do talk about the innovators and the renovators, two different categories of organizations in the book. The innovators are the ones you just profiled, the ones that may still be founder driven. They might be smaller. They might be big now, like an Uber that we profile in the book, but they started out being very innovative and really thought hard about customer experience. Amazon, the company I work with, and others in that category. But the renovators are the ones that have said, we better do something about this. We're getting our clocks clean, or we're having some challenges with market share. We're hearing some negative things from our customers. We're sensing things aren't going well. And those organizations actually can start excelling, because then they start tearing things apart. They start figuring out why there is the reason, why there are too many reasons for customers to contact them. And they interview customers. They listen to customers. So we profile much larger firms like E.ON, one of the biggest energy companies in the world out of Germany and the UK. We profile United Airlines that's working on this very aggressively. Their new head of customer service came from American Express, which is also well known for service support. So we see big organizations that are able to turn around and refocus on the customer experience by getting rid of friction as well. So it's not a death sentence, but if you don't deal with it, it might be. It very well could sink the company.
Well, and you also talk about 3 types of frictionless organizations. Mm-hmm. So what are these 3 types of frictionless organizations? Well,
the first one, as I mentioned, was the innovators, the companies that really start from scratch with thinking about the customer experience. They could be B2B, they could be B2C. Doesn't really matter what their business orientation is, but they start off by saying, our customers really are the center of what we have to do, and we better listen to them, and we better figure out how to make things easy for them. The second one would be the renovators, companies that are typically larger and wind up having to deal with this mainly because they have a real threat to their existence, or they have new leadership team, like the United Airlines example I gave you, and they wind up needing to move more aggressively. We talk a little bit about T-Mobile. T-Mobile USA has always had a pretty good reputation for customer service. At one time, the best in J.D. Power and other surveys. They ran into some walls back in the more like 2010, 2015 period. And they were the third largest carrier out there. Well, they decided to transform their marketing strategy. And when they transformed their marketing strategy to become the uncarrier, as they called it, they decided to transform their customer support strategy and make that even easier for customers to deal with them. And we have a couple of really good quotes and profiles in the book about them as a renovator. A third category was harder to find, frankly. Those were what we call responsive organizations. And those would be nonprofits, government organizations, educational institutions that also adopt this same frictionless strategy. We found maybe a half a dozen or 10 of them in total, which is not a lot. We're still looking for them, and we are finding some more as we move forward with the applications of the book. But the responsive organizations are the ones that are in the nonprofit field, and we saw some in Australia, we saw some in Europe, and some in the United States too, at the county, state, and federal level. But they're harder to find.
So you've mentioned, ACSI, which is the American Customer Satisfaction Institute. You mentioned Net Promoter,
right,
which is something that, some organizations follow. And you just mentioned also J.D. Power and Associates. Right. So, what happens in today's world when you start talking about a company pushing forth those customer satisfaction ratings in regards to customers now saying, yeah, right, and having doubt, right, and then also even being more critical with the organization. Right. You're touting and you're pushing these customer satisfaction numbers. But that didn't happen for me. So right. What are the risks in using those types of tools? Huge risk, and we address that also in the book in several places. And any survey score is an average. And any average will have a range of responses. And organizations that merely look at the average and quote the average are the ones that are going to get in trouble. They say, our NPS is 36 and last year was 34. Everyone looks around the room and go, great, we went up by 2 points. Let's move on to the next topic. But that 34 moving to 36 hides a lot of pain because it's just an average. And so any company that simply sits on its laurels with any score, whatever the survey type is in trouble. It's got to look at the entire range. It needs to look at those that are the customers that are the most happy and find out, well, what did we do? What was it that really got you happy? Was it something that had to do with the pricing or the interaction you had or service recovery or whatever it might be? But they also have to look really intently at the ones that are the lowest scores. So in the Net Promoter Score world, there's now, unfortunately, a new term called deep detractors. And those are customers that give you a 0, 1, 2 out of 11 points. 0 to 10 is the range. So if the average might be, in the 36, 40 category, you're going to have a bunch of customers still down there in 0, 1, 2 who say, we hate you guys. And you have to really focus on them. Go out to them before they leave. Or even after they've left, go out to them and find out what's going on. And we talk about that in the next to last chapter of the book that we call Learn. So averages are a real problem for companies. And we don't care whether it's the customer effort score or ACSI or any other one. There are going to be some customers that are unhappy. Totally right about that, Jim. And you got to really figure out who they are and how to deal with them. Oftentimes I see where organizations want to be able to drive, the performance in those different metrics, whatever they choose to essentially, stick their flag in. And I oftentimes see where they push that down even to the very front line level. And, there's a whole lot of studies associated with, operational impact and efficiencies. And, I've seen where as little as 10% of the score can actually be attributed to what the agent does within that interaction.
Right.
Where 10% is owned by the customer, maybe they're just way off base, right?
Right.
They're a little delusional. And then 80% is actually owned by the company in regards to their processes and procedures, practices and policies, and it goes on and so forth. And so I see a lot of these measurements where, and we've all probably experienced it. You go to, for example, a post-call survey, or you get a survey sent to you, and they only ask questions about the agent. So again, talking about risk.
Yep. Yep.
What do organizations need to do a little bit differently?
Well, they always need to ask the question why. So even if the question seemingly is about the interaction with the agent or the frontline employee in a retail store, customer center, whatever, they need to go through and ask, well, why? Why did you give us such a good score? Why did you give such a low score? Sometimes one of my colleagues likes to use the expression, what could we have done to have gotten more of a 9 or a 10? In other words, think aspirationally. And that's number one. Number two is make sure that you don't just ask about that customer experience but the agent's performance, because the customer came in because something bothered them, something got in the way, or they had a positive request to make. You've got those two different ends of the pole. And the best surveys actually know that. The best surveys know what that reason was, and they actually probe on that reason. So they have AI built into some of the tools. It's not just a dumb question, like 3 questions. It actually, this customer called in because their product was late. Let's ask them a survey question about, is this the first time it's happened? Or did we get back to you fast enough on it? Did we do the right remedy for you? And actually think about what the context is for the question or for the survey. But I totally get what you're saying. We see that as well. The customer service rep can't really change those processes, but he or she can deal with that, fix the problem at the time, and then signal back to the organization that there was a problem. So that kind of come back together. So the right owners, as we call them in product design, billing, marketing, logistics, and so forth, that they wind up getting tapped, getting assigned with the problem resolutions.
So as you're talking, I have to ask the question, and I start thinking about what are your opinions in regards to incentivizing, results for results for those types of measurements.
Don't like them. Don't like the incentives because it winds up accentuating the polar opposites, the outside ranges of the surveys. You want to get as much of a distribution as possible. But having said that, we talk about in the book a new wave of scoring, which actually doesn't even need to ask any questions at all. And we see that as, and not just us, but others in our field collectively see that as the next wave. The response rate for any surveys is usually very low. Now, J.D. Power has a panel of customers. They probably pay those customers, and they get a pretty high response rate. ACSI is also more of a panel group. Most other surveys are sort of randomly done, and you get a 8%, 12% response rate, which means 92% of your customers don't even respond at all. But what we are seeing as sort of, there's no good word for it yet, but we'll call it experiential built up survey responses, meaning survey scores. In other words, using AI and some machine learning, which we talk about and support as a concept in the book, you wind up saying, what would the customer have said if we asked them a question about their satisfaction or their experience with us, based on how long this took? Whether this worked or not, whether we got back to them on time, all the different steps in that journey can be measured separately. In fact, they usually are measured by a company in terms of some SLAs or standards. And so if you start measuring what that customer experience literally was, you can start building up a net promoter score, a customer effort score, a customer sat score for every customer who's out there. And we see that, and others in our field see that as the replacement of surveys that are out there.
So, and we didn't get, and we're not going to get into this, but I think for me, as I'm hearing and having a little bit of background in measurements, I mean, we're talking about quantitative and qualitative data, and being able, that's where the why comes into play, is we start getting, more of that qualitative data. So that we can, mine it, and then therefore really get to things that are impactful and meaningful. And so when you start thinking about friction and becoming more frictionless, it's definitely not all hung in the measurement. And you say that a lot of organizations have a long way to go, and you talk about this, their transformation path to frictionless can be, it has to be most effective. And you say that they need to understand process for the different levels. And so what is the understand process and the levels?
Yeah, well, the understand is really the way this whole thing starts. We have 9 steps in the book. Again, having learned from these organizations and companies that we were able to interview and research, we have 9 steps. The first one is to really understand what's going on with the customer, understand what they had to go through to get a hold of you, understand what those reasons were for them to reach you in the first place. And so there are sub-steps in each of these 9 steps as we lay out in the book. But the first part of understand is to break down what those reasons are in the customer's language. Most organizations have fairly broad brush categories or taxonomies like billing issues or technical problems or sales opportunities, which are the beginning of the answer, but not the answer. Because the customer doesn't say, I have a billing issue. They might say, my bill's too high, or your bill's wrong, or you missed a credit. And all of those verbatims, all those customer verbatims are that first part of the understand step, because then you can do the mining that you mentioned a few moments ago. You can literally start mining with speech and text analytics to listen to what the customer's reasons were. And you don't have to burden the customer service agent or the frontline employee to try to write down from some sort of a drop-down code what those reasons are. And so that's the first step. And I'll kind of pause on that one because that's really the most important of the steps in understand.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter if the agent does it, everything's going to be other, right?
Exactly. Oh, yeah, that bugs me. You see, the biggest reason is other. Well, then you get a real problem there.
Okay. So you talk about the understand process, and then you say that you need to assign and prioritize. So there is an assign and prioritize process. What happens in this stage?
So this stage is the second of the stages, and it is really critical because it goes back to my point a few minutes ago, which is the customer service rep can't really own the problems. He or she fixes whatever comes at them, and it's a big job. It's a tough job for them to handle. But there are owners, as we call them, across the organizations. So to give you an example, I'll give you an example back at Amazon. One of the biggest reasons customers still contact Amazon is, where's my stuff? You know, I'm expecting this product to arrive today, and where's my stuff? I need it, I want it, and so forth. Well, one of the sub reasons for where's my stuff is the shipper was late, meaning it left the warehouse on time, it left the manufacturer on time, but for some reason, the shipper was not able to get it to the customer on time. Well, at Amazon, we made sure that the vice president of outbound logistics, outbound shipping, was aware of every single time that a customer contacted us saying that the shipper was late, or that we determined that the shipper was late. In other words, the customer service rep could tell it left on time, but that gap allowed maybe 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is, didn't work. It was longer than that. And then his responsibility with his Six Sigma team, his analytical team, working with my team, was to figure out, well, what's going on there? Is there a pattern? Is it one part of the country? Is it one shipper? Is it a type of product, a range of products? And then they would go through methodically and figure out what those deep causes were, those reasons were, and be able to handle them. And so that got customer service and the logistics team working in concert to figure out what was wrong and to fix it so that fewer and fewer customers contacted Amazon about, where's my stuff, late by shipper. And that same pattern happens for billing issues, for technology issues, for promotional issues in many organizations that we see. So the assign and prioritize is figure out who's really responsible for it. VP of outbound shipping. What's the priority? Well, very high, because customers are quite anxious and they're going to call you again and again if that product doesn't arrive on time. So it's something that's a very high priority. So you set that priority, and that starts to focus the energies in the organization.
Well, okay. So we go through those two elements or pillars, and then you say that there's 5 strategic actions an organization must take in order to become more frictionless. What are those 5 actions?
The first action is one that's really well known these days because everyone talks about digital first, to have a digital solution, to have self-service options on an app, on the web, on an IVR, and other form factors. So digitize what really ought to be digitized, relatively simple types of inquiries like how can I change my password, or I need some information about your store location. So digitize those. Then we have eliminate. Eliminate is the action that I just talked about with respect to late by shipper. You should not have any customers contacting you saying, where's my stuff, and finding out that the shipper mistake. Get on that and figure out how to eliminate through root cause analysis. Then we have something that we call streamline. Streamline are the actions where you've never really seen this before, or it's a one-off, and you need to have that conversation with the customer to figure out what's going on, but it'll eventually be eliminated. So maybe you have a new product release, or you have a new version is out there of software, and you have customers beginning to call in saying, this doesn't seem to work with my existing systems. In other words, a compatibility problem, and you're not sure why, even though it had been tested. So you need to find out, well, what is your version number and how are you using it? And then through that, do some initial analysis to then eliminate it. The fourth one is what we call leverage, which is where you really want to have the conversation. It's good for the customer, it's good for the company. And those would be examples like, hey, I understand you have a new product out there that has a new whiz band feature. Can you tell me more about it? So then you want to have a conversation. Also in the leverage category could be something like, I want to cancel my account. Now, some companies just give you a button to push because they want to make it easy for you to cancel your account. Other ones want to find out why you want to cancel your account. Is there something we can do? Not the classic, we're not going to let you leave thing, but rather, we want to understand what to do to make sure we can keep you around. If we can't keep you, we want to make sure that we do a better job later on. And the fifth one is one we call preempt. And preempt can work with almost with all four of the other ones, but it's a way for the company to send out notices, messages, alerts, and so forth to the customer before they need to contact them on any issue at all.
Well, as you're talking, I start thinking about some of the conversations that I've had recently about the whole staffing issue in customer care. And, a lot of people are saying, hey, my supervisors and team leads are having to spend more time actually taking customer phone calls because of all of these staffing issues. So I started thinking about the detriment that being in those positions can be in regards to becoming more frictionless. What are some of the risks with, having that problem?
But having staffing issues and staffing shortages?
Yep.
Since customer service is such a critical function, and as I mentioned earlier, it's so hard to do well. It's increasingly important to find the right talent and hold on to the right talent and make sure that they are happy with what they're doing. They're working on issues that are really good for them. So the classic 8-hour shift that's good for the company may not be good for the individual. They may be better to have flex time or some time off, maybe 3 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the late afternoon that matches the employee's availability and their preferences. Skill-wise, it's increasingly important to have the right skills lined up with the right issues from the customer, so that if a customer has calling in about a billing problem, it's good to have a customer service agent that knows how the billing system or systems work and are familiar with some of these issues that have come in before, so they can almost anticipate what's going on. There is a new technology that we're very keen on. We talk about it, at least generically in the book without naming any vendors, that goes by terms such as augmented agent assistance, where AI listens to the call and actually helps the customer service rep or the frontline agent to be able to pick the right knowledge article or the right solution for that issue. Because knowledge bases have been around for a long time, but they're very complicated. Often they're not updated enough. And so these AI type tools can go in and say, Jim called because of this issue. We've seen that issue before. This knowledge article works. So it actually proposes it to the customer service agent. And those tools are going to be increasingly popular because it takes some of that burden off of the agent. It removes some of the friction, if you will, for the agent so that they can be able to have a much better conversation and solution.
Well, so here's a worry of mine. When we start talking about some of these solutions, even when you start talking about mining qualitative, information, is oftentimes I find where when you start peeling back and you start looking at the actual implementation of these, there's only a small percentage of companies that have, implemented some of them, have the, resource, allocated to be able to invest in them. They maybe don't have, enterprise type scale and thousands of agents. They're most of our contact centers are right in that, say, 100-seat range.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So if I'm sitting there, which is the vast majority of the industry,
right,
I don't have access to all of these whiz-bang things. Right. Where do I start with from some basics?
Well, the good news today is that there's a new category, a new set of vendors that are aiming at the smaller contact centers or companies that have smaller operations, and they're cloud-based, modularly set up so that you can basically say, okay, we'd like to pick this analytics tool, we'd like to pick this call routing capability, this call recording capability, and it's done purely on a SaaS basis, purely on a rental type SaaS basis. So it is much easier to get it than it used to be 10 or 20 years ago, when it was all license-based, very expensive, and was more the exclusive domain of the 1,000 agent contact centers and above. So I don't know whether you want me to name names, but there are 3-4 good cloud vendors, just to say that the classic cloud vendors that we all know out there are all racing aggressively to bring down, I'll say down market without being negative, bring it down to smaller organizations, the same capabilities that the bigger companies have been using for a long time.
Okay, so then if we say that once we've completed these 5 strategic actions on our path to frictionless, what comes next?
The next step, which is the last of the 9 steps, is one we call learn. So learn is the beginning of a constant feedback loop, a continuous improvement, constant feedback loop that says, okay, what have we learned as an organization from these different actions and the reactions to those actions, meaning the adoptions of those actions. So for example, let's say you've got a digital tool in place. It's an app-based tool that talks about delivery times, anticipated delivery times. And it gets tested, it gets put in place, and you find out that through the learning process that only 30% of your customers are even using it at all. 70% of customers are still calling up or still contacting the company. Well, you have to learn, but what is it? What's really going on there? And when you probe into that, maybe talking to some of those customers, talking to the customer service reps who dealt with those customers, you may find out that the customers don't trust the data because it didn't work for them a few months ago. They're not trusting that's now working right. And so you have to then, and maybe the other thing they're saying is that the range of delivery times is too long. You're telling me that it could arrive between Monday and Thursday. Well, no, thank you. I want to know exactly when it's going to arrive. So the tool as designed was not relevant for the customers. Customers want to know the day of delivery, maybe even the hour of delivery, and not some sort of a range. And so the learning process picks up and says, well, we should have a very high pickup rate, a very high containment rate of that digital offering. It didn't work. So what can we do about it? And so companies that are aiming to be frictionless say 70% failure is terrible. 30% adoption is better than 0, but we want to get 30% adoption up towards 100% adoption, almost like a first contact resolution metric within the contact center. Let's apply that same containment rate and near perfection, because that's what customers are demanding.
Okay, so I found it interesting, and I have to ask the question. At the end of the book, you actually say, and the chapter is how to get started. So why is how to get started at the end of the book?
Well, it's funny. My co-author David Jaffe invented that, and I really love what he and I were able to do together. What he was able to bring to the game here. He's so clever about this. The idea is some companies, some individuals, some readers start at the back of a book. They start by reading the index in the back of the book, or they start reading some of the references, and they start reading, well, what's the conclusion to this thing? I just want to get to the end. And so we decided to put at the end of the book how to start the whole thing, to kind of go, oh, for those readers to go, oh, okay, maybe these are things I don't know how to do. I better go back and read the book. The second reason David and I came up with this was one of, let's do kind of a quick summary. But let's call it a summary. Let's call it of how to get started, meaning kind of how to mobilize your resources, how to motivate everybody to really become a frictionless organization. So for those 2 reasons, we had some fun putting it at the end of the book. Okay.
So for me, when I think about customers and I think about friction, and the data actually supports it. In regards to delivering an excellent customer experiences, we have to do it internally first. Otherwise, it just falls apart really darn quick.
Right.
So if I'm starting to think about, and you mentioned some of this along the way, how do I really do a better job of becoming and creating less friction internally so it's felt externally?
Yeah, no, this is so critical, Jim. It's so critical. The old term for it is the next process is customer. If you have the attitude that within your organization, the next process down the step is your customer, and you got to make sure that that next process is understanding and receiving what you're delivering in a substantive way. Then you start to break down what these problems are inside of organizations. So the so-called silo effect is still there for many organizations. You've got a product design team, then you have a marketing team, you have a sales team, and they kind of toss it to each other, not really working with and listening to each other along the way. The book that came out 30 years ago that's still really successful is called The Service Profit Chain. And that had the same concept of each step is essential in the process. If any of those steps begin to break down, it winds up diminishing the entire effect. You can't really recover it. You can fix a problem briefly at the end, but you're not going in the deeper recovery mode, the deeper solutions mode later on. You have to deal with it much earlier in the process. So an example that we don't have in this book, but we had in our first book, is the Toyota auto factory, where any Toyota employee could punch a yellow button or red button on the assembly line if they thought something was a defect in front of them. And what happened, I actually observed this when I went to Japan many years ago. Someone pressed the yellow button, the conveyor belt slows. And when they press the red button, the conveyor belt stops. So the entire assembly stops. At that point, when we observed it from the catwalks, the process just in front of the person who pressed a button comes running over saying, "What did you see? What did I not do right?" And they've had that instilled in their manufacturing culture for a long time. So that can be applied to any organization in terms of billing, in terms of delivery, in terms of promotions, in terms of shipping. And without that, you wind up passing the buck, or the problem winds up manifesting itself somewhere down the line.
Well, as you know, talking about it, the impact and effect, and even in that manufacturing example, the front line is critical to all of this. But when you start talking about decisions being made for the company, oftentimes there are multiple levels above that. And if we start looking at the people who are at that level within an organization, you'll find very few, if any, that have actually been involved for any amount of time with interacting with the customer and solving customer problems. So that distance creates a significant problem. So if you start looking at, how can the customer essentially be more involved with these decisions that are being made at that top level, where does that play for you?
Once again, so critical. Companies that we profile in the book, other companies that we know out there, routinely hold roundtables or have sessions where they listen to recorded customer calls, or they go into the contact centers, they go into the retail shops, and they observe, maybe even take on the job. So T-Mobile, for example, has a program where I think it's directors and above, maybe senior managers and above, have to spend almost a week a year in a retail store, actually working in the store, not just observing, but actually working in the store, seeing what that's all about, setting up accounts, dealing with support issues, and explaining the differences among different types of phones, for example. And companies that are able to focus on, to actually dedicate the time to listen to the customer problems directly, not just look at survey results, not just look at secondary, tertiary reports, but actually listen to those calls are really important. So I was at Amazon a long time ago, as you mentioned in my bio, but Jeff Bezos would come down to customer service once or twice a year and actually handle customer emails. He would get set up and would go through and have to navigate the knowledge base, figure out what the problem was. And I remember one time he finished that, he turned to my supervisor who was standing here next to him. He said, "Geez, that was really hard. I think I got it done right." And the supervisor said, "Yeah, Jeff, you got it right. How long did it take me to do that?" And the supervisor said 14 minutes. And that was much longer than the average. And so Jeff goes, "Now I've got even a better sense how hard this is for you guys, because you got to go through all this and figure out previous purchases and so forth." So he had that direct experience. taking it one step further, whenever Jeff would have a visitor in his office, someone from Wall Street or someone from a business partnership or whatever, he would be able to sit there in a system we had set up, and he would be able to pick up the phone, punch 2 buttons, and get a live call in his office, listen to it. And it was in a listen-only mode. And he would then expose whoever was with him and himself to a live call that the customer service team would have with a customer. He could do that anytime he wanted to. In fact, anybody could at the director level and above. And so it gave everyone the opportunity to kind of listen in, find out what's going on. What when you talk about voice of customer, you're literally listening to the voice of the customer in that case. So those older examples are still available today with many other variations, so you can make sure that you reduce that gap, narrow that gap from the senior managers and executives down to what's really happening on the firing line.
So when I start looking at this and I start thinking about, some of the also multiple interaction methods that people can have these days, and even times customers actually solve problems for other customers. I mean,
Yes.
and some companies are doing a very intentional, community, type of base around that. But point being is that there's like multiple interactions that are happening that you are talking about the control. You're out of control. I mean, you have no control of that. And a lot of times you don't have visibility into that.
Right.
And I start thinking about the future of frictionless. Where do you think all this is going?
There'll be more and more of those channels. There'll be more and more of those interaction types, which is making it harder and harder to try to get your arms around all those different places for customers to express a problem or to get a solution. So, I mean, we use terms like omni-channel as kind of a buzzword, but it's increasingly important to know all those different customer contact points that you're making or that the customer is making into your organization, and have some standard taxonomy, some standard language, which we talked about in the understand step. What are the customers really saying about this? And then track their frequency, track the rate of those contacts. You want to see the rate of contacts go down for the contacts that are frustrating your customers. You want to see the rate of contacts go up for those issues that are positive for the customer. So if it's a sales add-on opportunity or an opportunity to save a potential cancellation, those are good reasons that you want to see go up. But for the vast majority, like my stuff's not working, or I don't understand how this is going to help me out, or your product is late, then you want to make sure that the rate of those contacts is going down. So look at the volume and costs of those divided by the number of invoices, the number of customers, the number of orders shipped, whatever that denominator might be. But we call that the CPX, contacts or costs per X, X being the driver. And so that has to go across all those assisted channels, all those contact channels, not just the phone channel, not just chat and phone, not just chat, phone, email, but also anything that comes in through social, community, even on the websites themselves too.
So so you're writing about this, and I need to make sure that I'm reading the subtitle about this appropriately as well. So it's the frictionless organization deliver great customer experiences with less effort. Okay, so you have this book we talked about on your bio, which your fourth book is going to be on about your grandfather and his experience during World War I and World War II. But I start thinking about you and the works that you've done and all this massive experience that you gathered and garnered. What's one of your goals that you can share?
One of my goals that I can share.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's a great one. One of my goals. I just want to raise the bar. I want to hear more. I want to read more stories about. I want to listen to more podcasts about, and I want to talk to more friends about how things are easier for them. And because we wind up talking about the things that are frustrating. One of my goals when I speak at conferences or when I do things that are online with clients or with organizations, I often start with, before I get going here, just talk among yourselves about what are your best experiences and what are your worst experiences recently, over time, your own personal experiences. Let's talk about this. And then it's really hard for me to get them to stop. Actually, the individuals really talk about it a lot. I say, okay, now just shout out what you guys been talking about. Almost invariably, they talk about the bad experiences, and they talk about them over and over again. It's almost like, I had that same bad experience with that company too, or that organization too. What my goal is, I want to hear a flip where customers come back and say, I had a great experience with this particular organization. They treated me well. Where this other person might say, I expected it would have been a problem to travel because of post-COVID and so forth. But, I took that airline. It was fantastic. I didn't have a problem at all. I want to hear a better ratio of the good stories to the bad stories.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Bill, the Hump Day Hoedown is a part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us rapid and robust answers to help us all move onward and upward faster. Bill Price, are you ready to hoe down?
I'm all set.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
What's holding me back is time. I need to spend more time focusing on some details because I wind up getting too busy and getting bogged down.
And what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
The best leadership advice I've ever received is in an organization. When I was a VP in an organization, this is before Amazon. If you don't piss off someone every day, then you're not pushing the envelope. So push the envelope. Make sure you're not just folding in. Make sure you push the envelope.
And what is one of your best tools that you believe helps you in business or life?
One of my best tools is my calendar. I want to make sure that I have a calendar that gives me a little bit of flex time, so I'm able to really think through things. So I'm not booked hour to hour to hour, but I've got a little bit of time in between things.
And what would be one book you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to the Frictionless organization, deliver great customer experiences with less effort on your show notes page as well.
Right. I'm a big fan of World War II and military history in general. So I think that the series by Ian Toll about World War II, it's a thick set of 3 books, are fantastic because they give you the inside view from the soldier, from the Marine, from the sailor's point of view, as well as from some of the strategy. And it starts to unravel why it was so difficult and so amazing that World War II was such a success for America.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information by going to Fast Leader Show or fastleader.net and doing a search for Bill Price. Okay, Bill, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25 and you can take all the knowledge and skills that you have with you. You can take them back with you. But you know what? You can't take them all. I'm sorry. You can only take just one. What skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you and why?
I would take back the skill of curiosity. It's a skill and a capability of curiosity. Always ask why.
Bill, I had a fun time chatting with you today. Can you please share with the Fast Leader Legion how they can connect with you?
Thanks very much. Yes, we have a website called frictionlessorg.com. You can read more about the book and additional stories and frameworks in there.
Bill Price, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.